Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show. Today I'm here with Brad Giadresco from Adelaide, and he's a firefighter. Hi Brad, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, no worries, Jules. Good to be here.
Thank you so much. Brad, what brings you to Hong Kong?
I'm actually here to welcome in the new year with the girlfriend, which is visiting family, and yeah, I'm just over here enjoying myself.
Great. Do you like Hong Kong?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah,
It's a
big
cool
city,
city, isn't it?
Yeah,
And
so many different things.
Yeah, it's funny that we're both from Adelaide. And
It is, yeah.
it's great to talk to you. Can you tell me, Brad, did you always want to be a firefighter?
Actually, to start with, I wanted to be in the Air Force. I wanted to be a pilot. Growing up, you always want to be a firefighter, stuff like that too, but I kind of had them both going at the same time. When I think I was about 20, I was going through the process of being a firefighter and a pilot, and yeah, both of them were going on simultaneously. I got accepted into the fire service first and had a few steps to go with the Air Force, and I started ranking them up side by side, and I've gone, I'm already in here. I've already got this job. I've still got steps to go. Might not make it. I'd have to move away from family and friends and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I just decided that I'd stick with what I was doing.
And how hard is it to become a firefighter these days?
It's incredibly hard. It's just like the role itself is obviously physically demanding, but just the want and desire to be a firefighter is huge. For example, they did a intake this year. 20 positions came up and they had close to 3,000 applicants.
Are you kidding me?
No, it's that competitive.
It's that competitive?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh my gosh. What sort of qualities do they look for in a firefighter when they're taking in recruits?
Well, all different types, you know. You want a lot of diversity, people that can relate to everyone on the street and stuff like that. But I guess what they're looking for the most would be like integrity and stuff like that. You're dealing with people that, well, you know, you say, for example, a famous person does something wrong, they're in the paper. If you know who they are, what they did. If I do that, they don't remember my name, they remember what I do. And that reflects on the fire service. So if you're that type of person, it really looks bad. So
basically, you've got to be a really good role model in the community.
yeah, exactly.
And is that both inside and outside of the job?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so people will know who you are and what you do on the outside. People, like, everything we do comes down to trust and respect. The community is trusting you with their property and their life and their families. And if you do something to break that trust, obviously it takes a long time to get that back. So that's a quality that people really look for, and that's what we need.
Yeah, that really makes sense. What are some of the key skills that you need to have in the job? Like, do you have to be strong, fit?
Yeah, of course. Like, you're dealing with situations where you have to be able to get people out and stuff like that. So you need to be able to drag and lift people and lift heavy tools and equipment. And I think communication would be like having the ability to communicate to all different types of people. You're dealing with different people at their worst. You know, you have to be able to relate to them, show empathy, and then you need to be able to communicate with your co-workers and say, this is what we're doing, this is how we need to do it.
And you've obviously got to stay calm, don't you? Because you're always sort of functioning in emergency situations.
Well, that's kind of it, yeah. You've got to be calm in the chaos kind of thing. So it's just, if you're that type of person, I guess you're drawn to this sort of work, but yeah.
And how long have you been a firefighter now?
It's past 10 years, so yeah, most of my adult life, I guess.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what sort of things do you do on the job? Obviously, you fight fires. What else do you do?
We're responsible for so much, you know. We do road crash incidents, we do hazmats, so every time there's a chemical spill, we suit up, we go investigate it, all that sort of stuff, make sure it's safe. And
can I ask what hazmat stands for? Or what it means? What is hazmat?
Hazmat's like hazardous materials and waste and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, if there's an acid spill or something like that.
Okay, right, great. I didn't realise that.
We go and neutralise it, all that sort of stuff.
Can you give me an example of incident where you've had to help somebody using big machinery like the jaws of life?
We've had a couple recently. Yeah, most of the time it's a car crash, obviously. We had a elderly lady. She hurt her neck real bad. The car wasn't actually in that bad a shape, but we needed to bring her out flat due to the neck damage, so we had to cut the roof off of this car in order to get the back brace in and get her out safely.
Are you responsible for keeping the person in the accident calm at the same time as getting them out?
Not really. Our job when we get to the scene is normally to get them out, but there's normally ambulance in there working on them. They sort of dictate what the patient needs, and then they tell us what they need, and we work out how to do it.
Oh, so they'll say, okay, there's a neck injury, so we need you to get the roof off the car and get this woman out. We've got to lift her out with that.
Exactly,
Right.
Yeah. They train how to get them out, like what they need to keep straight at certain times, and we train how to pull the cars apart. So
Oh, okay. What happens if you arrive at an accident before the ambos?
we get to work with, first aid and stuff like that. We're also trained with that. So we get in there and we start taking on that role until they get there. Obviously, they're better at it. They do it more. It's not really our bread and butter, but we are trained to help people like that.
And does that happen very often, or do you usually sort of get there about the same time?
Normally, in the past, they would get there first, but nowadays it's whenever you get an incident, it goes through a certain chain of command, and then they decide what sort of service they need to send there. Nowadays, they're sending us first, and if we need ambulance, we'll call them.
Oh, you could find yourself doing more first aid in the initial stages.
Yeah, these days it's happening a little bit more that way.
And are the firefighters comfortable with doing that, do you think?
For sure, yeah. It's part of our job. It's what we do. So, like I said, it's not really our bread and butter. Obviously, we want the ambulance to get there as soon as possible, but yeah, we know what we're doing.
Oh, that's really cool. And what about the ambulance guys? What sort of people do you call in different situations?
What do you mean by that?
Like, do you have, like you were saying when we were talking the other day about the guys in the red jacket, the red...
Oh, yeah. There's different levels of ambulance. Obviously, they would work on a hierarchy too. Depending on how bad the casualty in the car is, they might call for, the Star Force and stuff like that. So, MedStar, that's what they are.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, they're basically surgeon doctors that will come out and assist you. And they obviously have more authority, so they can make more decisions quicker and stuff like that. So,
do you actually find yourself watching some people actually doing kind of more surgery type stuff on the road and on the ground?
not really, You tend to get absorbed with whatever your role is, and you do that to the best of your ability. So half the time you're not even focusing on who you see and what's happening to them.
All right, cool.
You have to be able to disconnect yourself from that. Yeah, my responsibility isn't the person at the time per se. It's what we need to do to get them out.
Whether it's cutting them out or putting out the fire
Exactly.
or dealing with a chemical spill or petrol or whatever.
Yeah.
What are the best and the worst bits of your job being a firefighter?
Well, the best would be just a general lifestyle, really. You got a pretty good shift work, 2 days, 2 nights, and then 4 days off. And then you're working with like-minded people. You're in a team environment. Everyone's sort of the same type of personality, so that's great. And then, the bad side would be you deal with people at their worst. Like everyone calls you when they're in trouble. So, yeah, you have to deal with some pretty hairy situations, and you see some pretty bad things, but that happens.
Are you able to give me an example of where you might have been in a situation where you had to deal with somebody who was in major panic or really being very chaotic and difficult to cope with?
Well, yeah, there was a car accident actually 2 to 3 weeks ago, so it was fairly recent, and he'd hit a Stobie pole. He would have been travelling at 80, 90 kilometres per hour, and the car's wrapped around the pole and actually risen up off the ground. So this car would be about 1 metre to 1.5 metres in the air, which is quite unique for us too, because we work with stabilisation. We want a stable platform, so we're having to try to stabilise this vehicle while it's dangling in the air. The person's conscious, hurt his leg, he's in a lot of pain wanting to get out, but it's pretty hard work unwrapping a car from a pole like that. So it took about 2.5 hours. It was about 2 a.m. in the morning, pouring rain, that sort of stuff.
No way.
Everyone's trying to work together to get this done, and yeah.
Did he have to stay in the car until you got the car down?
Well, he couldn't get out. His leg was trapped. He was completely wrapped in this car.
This obviously is something you don't come across. How do you work out what the best way is to deal with something that you've maybe never seen before?
That's just part of the job. Every incident we see is different, even if it seems the same. So you have to be flexible with your training, and they do that. We train all the time. They throw different things at us, and we just have to respond to it. So I had seen this before, but not in person. I've seen it in demonstrations and stuff like that. So we knew what we were doing, but it is unique, getting ladders up to try to use your cutters and your spreaders to get someone out off the ground. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Do you all just sort of coordinate and communicate and work out, or you have somebody leading who makes the decision?
We have an officer, and then the bigger the job gets, there might be a commander who will come down and look after the job too. So it keeps working further and further up, and they make the decisions, and we basically follow through with the action.
Right. if something's pretty serious, the
Yep.
leader will call the commander down to make
Exactly.
sure that it's done well.
Yep.
What sort of incidences would you consider would be more serious?
Well, it depends what sort of life risk there is and risk to property and life. Basically, the bigger the fire, the more people will come to help you out. The more life risk there is, the more likelihood you're going to get someone there.
What would be the biggest sort of thing that you can think of that you might work on with the largest number of firefighters? A massive fire in a warehouse or something like that?
We had it was like an oil factory about 2 or 3 years ago go up, and it was on one of those 40-degree days in the middle of Adelaide. Yeah, they called it the biggest fire in about 60 years. You know, oil drums were just exploding. They looked like bullets flying off into the air. You thought you were at a war zone. It was pretty intense.
Oh, I can imagine. That's probably really scary because you don't know where the next explosion's coming from.
For sure. I remember going into one of the buildings with a fellow firefighter, and we were fighting this building by itself. And on any other day, this building being on fire would be the biggest thing, but it was such a minor part of that incident. We just couldn't believe it.
And how many fireys did you have working on that, do you reckon, roughly?
It's hard, you know. There's, I guess, 4 fireys to a truck. There would have been at least 40 trucks there.
They're coming from all over Adelaide, they're called in from all over the place.
Yeah, basically you send everything, and then CFS will come in and look after our stations while we're there fighting that fire. So
Wow.
everyone moves.
And how long might a fire like that last? Like, how long could you be working for at a stretch?
Well, we've had dumps and everything like that catch on fire where it gets in deep into the rubbish, and that lasts for days. So you could be there a couple of weeks.
You might work 12 hours and go have a few hours off or something and come back?
But
or?
you work your shift, but basically you normally do changeover at the station, so you might work a bit of overtime, but generally you'll be there your 10 hours or your 14 hours.
Oh, that's amazing. You guys are amazing. I can't believe what you do. You work closely with the ambulance guys. Do you recognise them? Do you see the same people coming back to different jobs?
You do, because you generally work in the same area. I'm at Woodville Fire Station, and there's obviously Woodville ambulance crews and stuff like that, and they tend to have a similar rotation to us. You see them, I'm not sure most of us know them on a name-to-name basis, but you look familiar and stuff like that, and you end up working together on a lot of the same things.
And do you feel like you're working as a team, the different groups, or do you feel like you're working quite separately? Or does it depend on the incident?
It's obviously incident dependent, but yeah, you do. When everything starts getting hairy, it's very much a team environment. You know, police are there controlling the traffic and everyone around you, protecting you guys. Then you've got the ambulance in there working out what they need to do with the patients, and then you're assisting them with whatever they need. So,
wow. There's a bunch of people that really all have to pull together to make sure that the incident's under control and they're saving lives. It's pretty amazing. It's an amazing job.
well, that's it. As soon as they leave our hands, the ambulance take them to the doctors, and then the nurses deal with it too. So when you look at one crash and how many people are affected by that crash, there's plenty of people.
Yeah.
You know, like onlookers that see the incident, that first call it in, all the way through to the final doctor.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I had never thought of it like that, but you're right. There's a really long process of getting everyone back on their feet, isn't there?
Yeah, it's not just you and the crash, it's all your family and friends that are affected. It's all, everyone that sees it, everyone that's helped you along the way. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
What do you think's the most frightening or challenging part of your job?
Well, you don't want to, in our role, you really don't want to let anybody down. So it's hard work sometimes. You end up in situations where you can't do too much. It's too little too late, really. But it's one of those things. You always want to help people and get you down a little bit when you can't.
By that, do you mean if you arrive late to a fire and things have been destroyed or people have already died or things like
Exactly.
that?
Yeah, exactly.
Does that happen often, or you usually get there fairly, like the alarms are raised early and you get there pretty quickly, or can it really vary as well?
It varies. A lot of the time you're rocking up where you can't really help anymore, and it's
that would be frustrating.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and perhaps a little bit sad sometimes as well.
For sure.
I know that you were in a serious event in 2013. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, back in 2013, we got called out to a commercial fire. It was a disabled facility. It was like a daycare centre, basically. And, called out to a fire in that facility. So on our way, on approach, we can see it's going pretty hot. We can see the smokes. We're preparing for it. My partner and I, Dave, gear up, we head in. We're fighting this fire, and we ended up getting trapped inside this fire and ended up getting burnt pretty badly. So, yeah.
That's pretty scary. Why did you get trapped, do you think?
Well, there's different things. Like, This was a very awkward style building. There was lots of twists and turns along the way. And this particular building had roller shutters where normally what happens in a fire, you know, something catches on fire, the pressure or the heat makes glass explode. It starts venting outwards, so all the smoke disappears. This had roller shutters, so it kept everything in. It wasn't able to vent, blackened out the room entirely, basically heated it like an oven.
You're actually moving around with no vision.
No, yeah, none whatsoever.
Is that common?
Yeah, it's really hard to see inside fires. Like I said, when the windows break, you generally get a bit of ventilation. And we have cameras now. Since that incident, we've got something called a thermal imaging camera, which we can use to actually track our way in and out of these places.
Oh, and is this the result of that incident? They brought the cameras in, or it's just been in the time?
Yeah, we had these cameras. They weren't on all trucks, and now they're a general part of your firefighting. So,
oh, right.
They were more being trialled at the time, and nowadays it's
mandatory.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, well, that's very cool. Tell me what happened with Dave. Did he get disoriented and you got out and he didn't, or what happened?
Yeah, basically everything was going fine, and then what happens in a fire, we had what's called a bit of a flashover, right? So when you're dealing with fire and stuff like that, there's what we call the triangle, where you've got fuel, oxygen, and heat. That's the elements that make up a fire. What we're doing, we're trying to disconnect one of those elements in order to put it out. Knock out the heat, it'll stop the fire. Take away the oxygen, it'll stop the fire. What had happened, we knocked the oxygen out of the room because all the smoke had sort of suffocated it. And we're in this room doing our searches. Doors left open, all of a sudden a track of air comes in, superheats the room flashes back up again. So all of a sudden you're in a superheated zone.
Right. The fire basically reignites through the oxygen, and that's what happened to you. Were you in there doing a person search?
Yeah, we were in there looking for people at the time.
Oh, were there people inside?
There wasn't in the end, thankfully.
Oh, okay. Then what happened with the flash?
The room flashed over. We basically hit the ground due to the pressure in the room. It was so hot. It's really loud too. It's really hard to explain what it's like inside a fire. You can't hear much. Your radios don't work too well. We decided it's time to get out of the room, obviously, at that particular point. So, yeah, we agreed we're leaving. We make our way out. I ended up getting outside the room, and I looked around and Dave wasn't with me. I'm sitting there and I'm going, all right, what do I do now? Need to find Dave. So I radioed in and told people he wasn't there, and then I ended up finding another BA crew, which is another firefighting crew that was about to go in and search. I paired up with them because I knew where he was and put my gear back on, went back in, we found Dave and made our way back out.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And you were a very young firefighter then, weren't you?
Yeah, I was only a few years into the job, so it was a pretty intense moment.
It must have been. And had you been trained for this situation before, or was this something that...
It's part of your training, you know, like you deal with fire and stuff like that all the time. But yeah, to
have to live it would be tough, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's different when it's actually happening to you and stuff. Like you're dealing... I was hurt at the time, you know, we'd been burnt in that flashover. Yeah.
Did you know you were burnt, or was your adrenaline really running?
I knew I was hurt. You could feel it at the time, but then the adrenaline kicks in. But then when that kicks in, you lose stuff like your hearing and everything like that starts to go because you almost go into survival mode where it's just get out at all costs.
Was your hearing a bit dodgy when you went back in?
It's almost like a bit of a ringing, like a constant ringing where your body's in a bit of a state of shock. But
and if the other crew wasn't there, would your training have said for you to go back in on your own? Or
you're not supposed to, no. But I shouldn't have come out without Dave in the end. I didn't think I did.
Yeah, you thought he was behind you.
I thought he was with me, and when he came out, I had to go get him. We had to go back in and find him, obviously.
Did he get disoriented and take a wrong turn, or...?
Yeah, that's basically what happened. We were making our way outside the room, and he got, like I said, it's really hard to find where you are in some of these houses, and he couldn't find the correct exit at the time. So he got trapped, and yeah.
What sort of injuries did you both have?
I ended up with about 15% burns to my neck and arms and a bit on my back, and Dave ended up with about 48% burns to his body.
Oh my gosh, that's huge.
He was in there about 2 minutes longer than I was in the end. This all happened in the space of about 2 minutes. So I was out, worked out he wasn't there, went back in, and that's the difference.
Got a crew and went back in. You were fast.
That's the difference, though. That's how quickly things can turn in a fire, you know?
Were you both in hospital? Obviously, he was in hospital for a while. Were you as well?
Yeah, I was in there for a couple of weeks, recovering.
And what about Dave? How long was he in for?
Dave was in there for much longer and had to go through physiotherapy and all that sort of stuff. It takes a while for your skin to recover and your arms to be able to extend the way they were.
When you think someone's trapped in a building and you have to go in, do you weigh up the risks before making that decision, or do you just go in?
You do. You obviously weigh up the risk, but it doesn't take much to. If you know someone's in there, you
give it your best shot.
You're going to go in there, pretty much. The only time we don't go in is when we know the owners of the house are outside, everyone's accounted for. There's no point risking ourselves for that situation, but if there's lives on the line, we're going to go in.
Were you given the wrong information that there were people inside the building? So you'd sort of taken that risk unnecessarily, or?
Well, at the time, they weren't sure.
Right.
And when you're not sure, you assume that there is.
Right.
So we were told that there's possibilities of people being in there, so you have to go in and look.
It's great that there wasn't, given the situation that you two found yourself in as well.
Yeah, the situation would have been unlivable at the time. So
you're lucky no one was in there.
Exactly.
How did you cope with that situation, both physically and mentally, having such a trauma at a young age, only 3 years into the job, ending up in hospital, helping another colleague who was in a much more dangerous situation? How was that for you?
It was hard, I went through ups and downs, you're feeling guilty. Like, I left Dave at some point, even though that wasn't my intention. So yeah, you feel guilty and that sort of stuff, and then you wonder if you're going to what you got to do next time, and then what people are going to think about you and what you did and how you went about it. So yeah, so to rebuild your confidence while everything else is healing too, it was hard, definitely, but the fire service provides a lot of counselling and that sort of stuff. So
that's great. And was that useful for you? Did that help?
Yeah, definitely. Being able to talk it out with people that have dealt with similar situations and stuff before, and yeah, it definitely helps to talk.
Yeah. It's a good thing, isn't it? It can really help the healing and speed up the process, can't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Did you go back to work and then start sort of in more of an admin or desk sort of role before you went back into fire, or did you go straight back in?
It took a while for my body to heal. So it took, I'd say, about 9 months for it to get back onto the trucks. So
wow.
Yeah, I was mainly making lunches and stuff like that for the boys.
And was that more the physical healing from the burns or healing from the emotional trauma of it? Or
it was a bit of both. I wasn't quite ready for it. It hasn't happened much in Adelaide, so it was new for everyone there too. So we were working out different ways of what would be the best way to bring myself back to work and stuff like that.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Was that sort of uncommon? So they had to work out how to best assimilate you back in, and with the therapy and
our equipment is world class. So, nothing goes wrong normally. You feel in your suit, you feel invincible, Like you go into these situations, you're in ovens and fires, and you're fine. So we just ended up in a situation where we weren't. Normally have this confidence about you that everything's going to be fine. So to deal with all that and then work out the best way to get me back onto the trucks, we did simulations. They set up rooms and everything, set them on fire, and basically sent me in to deal with the situation. So I was able to deal with fire and everything in a controlled environment. And
well, they did that just for you to help you get back on your feet. Wow, that's incredible. I would never have suspected that they would go to that length to help you get back on the job.
It was very good, yeah.
And how was it in those simulations? Did you have old fears or feelings or panic or anything like that coming up initially?
Not really. By the time I got back into the simulation stuff, I was ready. It was just more about proving myself to others. That's what I was doing. I was wanting to show everyone that I'm not going to let them down.
Oh, wow. Good for you.
Yeah.
Wow. You're so impressive. Brad, do you feel like you had PTSD at all after the event?
Not really. I wouldn't say it got to me that much. I'm definitely a lot more aware now. I think that comes with age, The older you get, the more aware of things you are. So a bit more defensive, I'd say, with the way I go about things these days. But
okay. Yeah. In other words, you're sort of looking for issues before they come up.
Exactly. I'm thinking about things going wrong a bit more, where I had too much faith that everything was going to be fine. It sounds...
No, I get it.
I don't know if it sounds like overly confident or stuff like that, because it's not that, but it...
No, it's really... I guess it's security in your training, your team, your equipment, and that's a good thing to have. How could firefighters do the job without having that?
Exactly.
It would be too stressful, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Since that point, have you had any flashbacks over the past 5 years, or had any situations where you revert back to that fear, or have you been able to move on really well from it?
I feel I've moved on pretty well. The first few fires back were a bit, the heart was racing a bit like it was when you first started joining, and had another fire basically next door to this place a few years later, and just seeing that pop up on the screen of you're going to a fire at this place sort of made things roll back over in my head. But yeah, ended at that fire, it didn't end up being much anyway, but it was just, yeah, got the heart going for sure.
And have you been in any really scary situations since then where it's been touch and go?
There's always situations where it's touch and go, but it's
part of the job.
Yeah, I love doing it. So it's one of those things. It's you get a bit of an adrenaline rush with it. You're helping people, so it's yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm so impressed. I'm so impressed. You're amazing. I've got to ask you how Dave went with his recovery, and is he still a fiery?
Dave took a while to recover, and he ended up having skin grafts. Now, I chose not to get skin grafts because they said if I got them, I'd never be able to go back to the trucks. Because
why is that?
You can't sweat through skin grafts.
Oh.
So obviously, someone in Dave's position, 40-something% burns. If he isn't able to sweat through that much of his body, going back inside a fire is a bit of an issue. So he wasn't able to do that, and I decided that my skin will heal. I got a bit more scarring because of that, but, scars will heal.
Scars are sexy, I hear.
That's what they say. But yeah, he works in the communication sector now.
Oh,
so
okay.
When you call 000, you'll be talking to Dave.
Do you have scars now on your arms and your chest?
Yeah, for sure. They're fading every single year, but they're still there. They remind me.
I can't even see them just looking at you now, so yeah.
Yeah, it was very obvious for the first few years.
Mm-hmm.
But
and was it itchy or tight skin, or did you have any trouble with it, or was it okay?
Oh, initially it was terrible. They would have to wipe it all away, They didn't want it to scar, so they would wipe all your skin away in order for it to heal, and they'd put creams over top of it.
Really?
So you're forever dealing with, open wounds and stuff like that. So it wasn't much fun.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they get you on pretty good painkillers at the time, but yeah, it still hurts rubbing away healing skin.
How long did that process go on for?
That process was about 2 weeks. So
Right.
It was just, after that, you just had to keep it covered, no sunlight. I wore, like those arm sleeves that you see on athletes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I had to wear that for about a year.
Oh, okay, and that's to help with the healing, isn't
Exactly,
it? And protect it.
It was way more sensitive than any other part of my body.
Do you guys have regular training of simulations? You know how they gave you the simulations to get you back in on the truck and back into fire after your accident?
Yeah.
Do you guys have regular training along the way as you're just going throughout the regular year?
Yeah, so when you first start out in the job, you are a probationary firefighter and you're trying to work your way up to a senior firefighter or even further to an officer. So your first 7 or 8 years of your training, you've got a certain amount of criteria that you'll learn along the way, like driving the trucks through to rendering hazardous materials safe and that sort of stuff. So we do different training every week. It might be just general skills maintenance, but we do so much that it's hard to cover certain aspects thoroughly all the time. We're a jack of all trade.
Yeah.
We deal with road crash, hazmat, fire, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. What about getting cats out of trees and stuff like that?
That happens all the time.
Does it?
Yeah, I was very surprised. I thought people
I thought that was a myth.
I thought it was a myth, but I pulled plenty of cats. The ones I like the most is birds in trees. People call us to get birds out of trees. And it's like, birds belong in trees,
I think you can help Pam.
Yeah, exactly.
Later this afternoon.
Yeah.
Dookie's in a tree.
He sure is.
Okay, great. Your dad's a bit of a fiery. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I always tell people he stole the idea from me. He became a fiery pretty late in life. I was in about year 10. We were going through, we were looking at possible careers, He's like, Brad, what do you want to do with yourself? And I wanted to be a firefighter at the time. And he's like, well, what's involved? And of course, just a kid, you're like, I don't know what's involved. Everyone seems to like him and they're big, nice guys. So he's like, all right, well, we need to look into this. So we went for a career day down at the big Adelaide fire station, and he took me there, and they walk you around, they tell you what they do and how they do it and what's involved in the job. And yeah, he tagged along and he goes, this is great. And he was a bank manager for the ANZ Bank for about 20 years, and within 6 months he'd quit and he'd become a firefighter.
You're kidding?
Yeah, and meanwhile I'm sitting in high school going, that's my job that you got there. But it's, having him there helped pave the way for me to get in. I feel, I was much more aware of what I was going into at the time.
Yeah. So, has he had any situations where he's had any danger like that situation you were in? Because he's been doing it a long time, hasn't he?
He has been doing it a long time. He'd be up to 15 years now, I reckon, 15, 16 years.
Oh,
but
okay.
Yeah, he's definitely had incidents where things got hairy on him, but he was able to get out of it before it got too chaotic. So
I can remember my dad. My dad was part of the fire service, like the volunteer fire service in the country in Australia, and they had a bushfire that they went into, and they pulled the truck in, and then they were surrounded by the fire, and they had to reverse back out to get out.
Oh,
and
really?
Luckily, the guy driving remembered the way out backwards and saved everyone's lives.
Yeah.
That was years and years ago, but it can just change in a flash, can't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Like literally a
Fire can turn on
flash.
you. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you guys work at the same station?
No, we work for each other. Like if he needs a day off, I'm able to cover him and stuff like that. But they don't like you working with family in case you get into tight situations. You know, if, say, for an instance, someone's in a fire, they hurt themselves, they go down, and we can't go in and get them, you're much more likely to disobey orders if it's family. It'd be too hard, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So if that's your father or your son in there, you'll go, I'm going in there anyway.
Yeah, and then you could both risk it. You could both die.
You become another hazard for other people to have to deal with.
Yeah,
so,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
A bit like Brad and Angelina used to not fly on the same planes.
Well, there you go. Yeah, so...
And have you ever turned up to an accident or a fire where there's been people that you know involved?
There hasn't, actually, no. I'm surprised that that's the case. I found out later on that there were friends of friends that happened to be in certain fires that I fought. And, you know, one time I rocked up to a car accident where the person was in pretty bad shape, and the car, it was the same colour and the same model as my brother's car, and the license plate was really similar, and I got those feelings of, this could be it. And, you know, walked up, it wasn't him, thankfully, but it's, definitely
because
that puts the fear of God into you right
I bet
there.
it does. And Adelaide's not a massive city, so
No,
the
it's
chances of you coming across people you know are probably quite high, aren't they? Especially the longer you're in the job.
Yeah, it is your responsibility to try to disconnect yourself from that situation. So if you do know these people, you're supposed to make it known to your officers and take a step back.
Oh,
so
is that right?
Yeah.
If you turned up and there were friends or family involved, you would have to leave the scene.
that's the idea behind it. Yeah, you're supposed to step back because you take things way more personally.
Yeah.
You know, as I talked about before, we try to disconnect ourselves from the situation as much as possible so we don't carry that burden. But if it's friends and family, you just can't do that.
No, that'd be so hard. How were your mum and dad about you going back to work after this sort of close call? Were they okay, supportive, or did they want you to change careers?
They were very supportive. They know this is what I want to do, and it's all I know what to do. You know, I'd been doing it for a few years, and that's all I could see myself doing for the future. So it was more about focusing on getting back to work, yeah.
And apart from the counselling and the training with the fireys, what else helped you get back on your feet, do you think?
I had a great support network of friends and family, and even my crew. You know, the fire crew were always dropping in, seeing how I was doing along the way.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. So they'd drop around the home. And
another thing I was wondering is if you were at a situation and say there was a bystander or a family member there and they're hysterical, they're not a part of the accident, but they're there. Does that mean that you have to deal with that person, or do you just get on with what you're doing, or do you have to do both?
You have to do both, yeah. Those people are just as much a part of the incident as the people involved. So, you know, they're going through shock and stuff like that too, so you have to help them.
And so I guess then you've got to prioritise, don't you?
Do.
Put out the fire, deal with the person, or, you know, do the first aid.
Yeah.
Like, you'd have to sort of work out which is most important at the time, would you?
Well, the officers are making these decisions for us. They're weighing up how many crew are doing certain things and what we need to take care of this job. So they'll be calling in more crews to come help us if that's the case.
All right.
Yeah.
So basically, any incident you are working on, you've got somebody senior telling you what you need to do.
Yes.
You don't actually have to make specific decisions.
You do when you're inside the fire. Obviously, you're making decisions inside there. They can't see what you're confronted with, and you're making decisions from that point. But they'll tell you, they'll say, I want you to go into this fire, I want you to do a left-hand search, and I want you to find the fire, I want you to find people.
Right.
So, and they'll give you a task, and you get to work doing that.
And what would be the criteria for, say, getting out? When do you actually get out of that situation? At what point? Do you just work on instinct, or is there actual specific criteria?
Well, if there's no life risk anymore, you know, we find that there's no people inside that fire, there's no reason for us to be risking our lives to be in there anymore, so we will pull ourselves out of that situation. Sometimes if the roofs start collapsing in on you, you'll make a decision, all right, it's too risky, we got to get out.
Because you've got to still put yourself first, don't you?
You do.
Even though you're trying to help everyone in the community, you've got to not risk your life.
Well, you're risking in a way, but you're also, yeah, exactly, you don't want to become part of the problem. You know, you
Yeah.
can't help anyone by being trapped inside as well.
No, exactly.
So,
Have you seen the film Backdraft?
yeah, I have actually.
Is it realistic?
Well, the whole backdraft situation was similar to what happened in that fire that I described.
Oh,
That's
right. And it means the oxygen comes in and
Exactly.
causes the flare up of the fire.
Yeah, as I talked about with the fire triangle, you know, you've got your three elements. So that fire had the heat and it had the fuel load. It was just lacking the oxygen. So what happens in a backdraft? Someone opens the door, it sucks in that oxygen to feed the fire. The chemical reaction happens, big explosion.
And is that what happened in your incident? Somebody let oxygen in?
So there was oxygen introduced into the area, which reignited.
Do you know how that happened?
No, not really. It would have been a door left open or something like that.
Right.
But normally we don't deal with situations like that because
The windows are blown
exactly,
out. And,
yeah. So you
so
don't
the
get
roller
that.
door thing really messed you up.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it was just a very unique situation that obviously everyone will be a lot more aware of nowadays. But like I said, every job you go to is different and you don't think about certain things at certain times.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What was going through your mind as you went back in to find Dave and bring him out?
I just knew I had to find him. It was one of those things. Like, it's really hard to describe what I was feeling, but I don't know if I could have lived with myself knowing that I got out and took care of myself without going in to help him.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm like, I knew it was a risk to go back in, obviously, because I was already hurt, but would have been more of a risk. I don't think I could have gone back to the job if I didn't go back in.
Yeah,
So-
that makes sense. And were you panicking or calm?
I was definitely nervous because it was one of those situations where you don't know how you got to end up, you know? Could be the end.
Yeah.
So you're going into that knowing that that might be the case, but
Did that cross your mind? This
It did.
could be the end of me.
it could. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It was,
Wow. So
yeah.
that's so courageous to take that step to go back in.
Well, it's one of those things, you know, you don't want to, it's like I said, you don't want to leave your
Yeah.
friend behind and, you know, that's what we do. And he would have done the same for me. So
Yeah. And would you do the same thing again?
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. You're quite amazing. Especially, how old were you at the time?
I would have been about 23, 24 years old.
23, that's a baby. And you had to make such a quick, brave decision. That's amazing.
It's, yeah, seconds matter in those,
They
in
do,
those
don't they?
instances. Like I said, he was in there 2 minutes longer than me and I was 15% burns. He was closer to 50. And I knew where he was, so no one else could have helped him in that making it
Yes,
that
you
quick.
had to go back, didn't you? Because
Yeah.
you knew which way to take them. How many guys went in with you?
2 others. You tend to work in teams of 2.
Right.
So
And they knew you were injured?
I'm not sure what they knew at the time, but
Because it was so quick. Yeah.
it's very hard to hear each other. You know, things are like you've got your masks on, so you're muffled and
Yeah.
you're trying to yell at each other. It's hard to hear, and I don't know how coherent I was at the time because I was in a
Injured.
bit of a shock.
Yeah.
So yeah,
You don't have like little speakers in your mask or whatever that goes to other people's ears.
no.
You should ask them to organise that.
We're looking into it actually.
Yeah.
We've done trial runs. There's all different types of stuff that we try every week. So
Right.
none have really suited what we want to do.
Oh,
so
okay.
yeah, we go through all these different trials and stuff like bone mics and stuff like that. Each has its pros and cons, but we haven't found anything that's worth replacing our current system. So
Right. And as you said, it was one of the first incidences like that in South Australia. I know you got quite a bit of media attention. How was that?
it was a bit intense. It's something you're not really used to from my position, you know.
You don't
Cameras.
have a reporter talking
Yeah.
to you every day.
Yeah, people wanting to get interviews and that sort of stuff. I wasn't really interested at the time, you know. I didn't really want to be in that situation. So it's,
And I guess you wanted to just focus on your recovery.
yeah, exactly.
And did you do any television or
No.
any sort of... You did a newspaper interview?
I did a newspaper in it. That was early on in my
Right.
career. Yeah, I didn't do an interview afterwards. They took quotes out of conversations I had with my superiors and stuff like that, but I never spoke directly with
right.
any media
okay.
people.
Okay.
So,
Well, I appreciate you speaking to me 5 years down the track.
Yeah.
'Cause it's a really amazing story of courage and bravery and, you know, resilience and overcoming terrible situation, really. And I think it will be really inspiring to our listeners and really, really positive. So thank you so much.
yeah, no worries.
What would you say to any young person who wants to become a firefighter?
That's a good question. What would I say? It's
It's quite a common thing for young boys in particular, isn't it?
Yeah.
To think this is what I want to be, a policeman or a fireman or...
well, it's a great career, you know. It's very rewarding. You get a lot of job satisfaction with it and everything like that. And if that's the type of person you are, if you're willing to help others and put others above yourself, Yeah, you want to be respected in the community. It's great work.
And do you think it's something that you can do right up to retirement? Like, do the fireys sort of from 40 to 60, do they still fight fires, or do they move into other roles?
They do. We have guys sitting on the backs of trucks that are in their 60s for sure. But obviously, they've got all this experience, and that's invaluable at the time, you know. Like I was saying before, every situation is different, and they've seen thousands of fires, thousands of accidents, and know how to respond that way. Whereas when you're first starting out, all you can bring is, you know, your positivity and your physical attributes while you're learning. So they're invaluable, the older guys.
What I really wonder is, how do you deal with that controlling fear? Or do you get used to what you're doing so you don't feel fear? Like for me, I'm very good in emergencies. Like I've, you know, resuscitated people and been at car accidents and doing that. And I recognise that when you're in the moment, you just get on with it. But then afterwards, you have that kind of shock feeling, or the, you know, it affects you later. That's what it does to me anyway.
Yeah.
Is that what happens to you?
Everyone deals with it in a different way, you know. I treat every situation almost like it's a game or a sporting event, which is, it's kind of, people get a bit confused when I say that.
I say that about giving birth.
Oh, there you go.
That's when I gave birth to my daughter, it was like a sporting event, and every contraction was an event, and I just had to put focus for like a whole sports day.
Well, that's what I do, you know. You rock up and you've got the job or the challenge in front of you, and I'm going to do everything I can to win. So I focus on that. I don't really see people. I see a challenge, and then I do what I can when I can. And when that's gone, it's gone. It's straight out of my head. So that's the way I'm able to disconnect myself, because if you look too deeply at things, it'll eat away at you, and you just can't do that with my job. Yeah,
you'd have to have that skill, wouldn't you? Or it wouldn't be something that you could continue to do for a lifetime, would it?
For sure, yeah.
Would you say that the levels of stress for firefighters are very high, and that it's something that has to be focused on and looked at as a part of the firefighting community?
Well, we deal with stressful situations, but if you talk to a group of fireys, they'd probably be the most relaxed people you've ever met. Everyone's so chilled and down to earth, and I guess we have to be that way in order to deal with these situations, because, the more amped up you get, the more you'll start to panic and you won't be able to think clearly. So we're so mellow that when these things do happen, we're able to think through things and react accordingly.
Right, that's so interesting. And then you're able to calm yourselves and debrief afterwards. And after every incident, would you have a debrief about how it went? And
there's a couple. We do have different types of debriefs. We have what's called a hot debrief, which is directly after the incident. We'll sit around and we'll talk about it as a group, and we'll roll through everyone's responsibilities and what they did upon arrival. And then afterwards, there'll be further counselling offered if, you know, there was things that people were feeling uneasy about what went down.
That's good, isn't it?
And then you have another debrief later on where people have had a chance to sit down and think about how everything went, talk about what we can change, what went well, that sort of stuff.
In my sort of perception of Aussie blokes, they're not that sort of open to talking about their feelings or having counselling. Do you think that the firefighters are open to that counselling if it's offered to them and they need it?
For sure. We do have those things available, and, you know, I've used it before to help deal with my sort of situation. I know other guys that have used it for different reasons, so it is there. The world's sort of changing a little bit in that way, isn't it? Everyone's becoming a little bit more open, and I feel, it's
a good thing, isn't it? It's a very good thing.
Exactly. We kind of roll with change. It's what we do. So I'm finding a lot of people are doing it these days, which is really good to see.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Brad, thank you so much for joining me today. You're an inspiration, and thank you to all the firefighters out there and the police and everybody that helps in the community. It's such an amazing thing that we all couldn't live without. Thanks so much for talking to me. You're an inspiration, and this is just brilliant to have your story.
No worries, Jules. It was a pleasure being here.
Awesome. Thank you.
No worries.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me. and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.